Welcome into a Fact Finder Investigates special. I'm Dylan Domingue. It's hard to believe it's already been 13 months since the tragic mid-air collision in D.C. involving a flight from Wichita and an Army helicopter. But even after more than a year, no permanent changes have been made to flight safety laws, despite repeated calls from victims' families and the NTSB, who was the leading investigative agency into that crash. In late February, House lawmakers had a chance to change that with a vote on an aviation safety bill known as the ROTOR Act.
On this vote, the yeas are 264, the nays are 133. Two-thirds not being in the affirmative, the rules are not suspended and the bill is not passed.
The ROTOR Act failing to pass by one vote despite passing unanimously in the Senate. The bill even had support from the families of Flight 5342, but right before the House was set to vote on it, the ROTOR Act lost some momentum. A day before the vote, the Pentagon issued a statement opposing the ROTOR Act for financial and national security concerns. Some House lawmakers say it wasn't a vote against safety, but a vote on what the ROTOR Act would require, and they wanted more input from the House.
Aviation policy is enormously complex and deserves the full deliberation of Congress to ensure that we get it right.
Requiring our fighters and bombers and highly classified assets to regularly broadcast their location puts our men and women in uniform at risk by exposing operational planning, aircraft details, and patterns of life to our adversaries.
Now, after the ROTOR Act failed, some House lawmakers backed a different aviation bill known as the ALERT Act. This bill was introduced in the House after the NTSB released their final investigative report into the mid-air collision. Some House lawmakers say that their bill strengthens air safety regulations and addresses all of the NTSB recommendations. However, the chairwoman of the NTSB, who has spent the last year investigating the crash, disagrees with that.
We can talk all day about what the ALERT Act does, and I look forward to working with the Committee on Transportation and working with the Committee on Armed Services. But it is not how it's being portrayed. In many areas, it doesn't implement the NTSB recommendations. I don't want a working group. I don't want a report. I don't want no action. You want to implement our recommendations? It's one line. FAA and the Army shall implement recommendations in this report. That's what it does. So getting up on the House floor and saying, we implemented all the NTSB recommendations is false.
That is a passionate and animated Chairwoman Hamady standing alongside victims' families, saying they do not support the newly introduced ALERT Act as it's currently written. Now, in this letter to House lawmakers, Hamady says while the ALERT Act would address a few of their recommendations, it falls short of implementing all of them. So this includes requiring all aircraft to be equipped and use ADS-B-In. That is locator technology that pilots use so they can see the position of other aircraft when flying. Now, if ADS-B-In had been installed and working properly on both aircraft, the pilots of Flight 5342 would have first been alerted about the helicopter 59 seconds before that collision. Now, this same recommendation has been made for years. It's why the families of Flight 5342 say this crash shouldn't have happened. I sat down and spoke with Doug Lane, who lost his wife and his son in that incident. He says his family should still be here today if those safety regulations were put in place before January 29th.
Back in 2008, the NTSB actually recommended to the FAA that they include FAA and ADS-B-In requirements in their rulemaking at that time. The FAA declined to do that. My son was born 5 months later. He died at age 16. So they had a literal lifetime in the FAA to get this correct through rulemaking. They failed to do that numerous times. So we're not willing to take a chance on leaving it to them. It needs to be written into law.
Fact Finder here is joined with investigator Michael Schwenke. As we break this down, we will be breaking down the difference between the ROTOR Act and the ALERT Act, maybe why the ROTOR Act did not get the support. But we just heard from Doug Lane there. A lot of the family members were in D.C. for the vote. They were inside the Congress when it happened. Very disappointed. We've seen that especially in the week after, the disappointment from the families.
You've talked to so many of these families, how frustrating it may be, because what appeared to be an idea or a law with a lot of support behind it, passing the Senate unanimously, It appears to have support across the board, yet it doesn't get the 2/3 needed in the House. Just how frustrating, because we've heard from so many of them saying they don't want their loved ones to have died in vain, that something needs to come out of this to make air travel safer, and yet here we are, still debating it.
And this legislation was introduced last year. So it was right after the NTSB started coming out with their preliminary report and did that 3-day investigative hearing where we heard from the FAA, we heard from the Army. So the basis of the ROTOR Act had a lot of what the investigation already revealed. And when the final report came out, it only really reassured what we already knew. So the House argued that they wanted to introduce their own legislation following the NTSB's final report. But the families and the NTSB, they argue the ROTOR Act addressed that and addressed the key issue that we saw that, caused that collision.
And the NTSB chair very passionate about it. So let's break down the difference between the two, because it can be confusing. So we have the Alert Act and the ROTOR Act, as Dylan was mentioning. The ROTOR Act first introduced last year and passed through the Senate. That was a unanimous vote. In the bill, it addresses a key NTSB recommendation to require both military and commercial aircraft to use ADS-B. It would have also closed a loophole that allows military aircraft to fly without broadcasting their location, especially for less sensitive flights like a training mission. So Dylan, on paper, ROTOR Act seems to be the solution to the problem of air safety here.
It seems to be the solution, but House lawmakers argue that the ROTOR Act is a flawed response to the crash. Obviously, the family has a lot to say about that reaction to it, calling it a flawed response, because that's not what they consider it. But the House says why they introduced the Alert Act is because it's a wide-ranging bill that addresses all of the NTSB's recommendations. That's in their words. The Alert Act would direct the FAA to upgrade collision avoidance technology on commercial aircraft and require closer coordination between the agency and the Department of Defense for the same technology on military aircraft. Now, it would also enhance training for air traffic controllers and review congested airspaces. But here's why the NTSB says they do not currently support the Alert Act as it's written. It centers around that ADS-B technology we've been talking about. The NTSB wants all aircraft to have ADS-B in, not just commercial. They want military involved with that as well, so pilots can receive the locations of other aircraft that's being transmitted. And as you see here by this chart, the ROTOR Act mirrors what the NTSB recommends, but the Alert Act does not require ADS-B in for all aircraft and creates some exemptions.
All right, so Dylan, the families of Flight 5342 say this shouldn't be a debate between one bill or another. So would they like to see both of them pass in some form?
So they're confused about why this has to do anything about politics. It shouldn't be a House versus Senate bill. And they were confused how the House introduced the bill very last second. The ROTOR Act, again, we talked about it, seemed to have all the momentum, and then just last second, it didn't. They wanted to get the ROTOR Act across the finish line. They said we are so close. We already have the support. Senate passes it unanimously. You have the NTSB who has worked on this case saying this needs to be implemented. Let's get that across first. Yes, there are other safety regulations that we need to address. Let's get one done first. Then we can focus on those in another bill after.
All right, so we've heard from both sides. Now we're hearing from those who have flown in that DC airspace, which is a completely different airspace, really, from a lot.
It is very congested. This week, we spoke with a pilot and an aviation attorney who believes ADS-B technology could have prevented that crash. He also did not mince his words when he was asked about what it means that aviation safety legislation has still not passed. Take a listen.
You see Congress doing some stupid stuff, but this is the height of stupidity.
Aviation attorney and pilot Mike Slack not holding back, as he was surprised lawmakers did not pass legislation that would have required key locator systems to be in use on all aircraft.
We need all aircraft in the National Airspace System beeping their positions to each other, and that's just an imperative.
Mike knows the challenges firsthand of flying in the DC airspace, especially at night. He says the lights from other aircraft can blend in with the lights from the city.
So the night environment into Reagan is way different than the daytime environment. And that's where the real risk comes in.
In their final report, the NTSB created this simulation from the Army helicopter's cockpit on the night of the crash. The pilots did request visual separation from the plane, but investigators believe the helicopter pilots could have mistaken Flight 5342 for one of several other planes in the sky. For Mike, this recreation reassures the need for ADS-B technology to alert pilots where other aircraft are.
I can see it on my displays in my aircraft if there's another aircraft nearby, and I get an alert. I get a proximity alert on my screen. And let me tell you, you get a proximity alert on your display, your pilot instincts kick in right away.
While Mike believes the ROTOR Act should pass, he says safety measures like that should have already been in place years ago, and it should not take a tragedy where 67 lives were lost for change to be implemented.
This bill had substance in it that was needed to protect against further unnecessary mid-air collisions.
Yeah, Dylan, politics aside, it is a little crazy when you think about the technology that we have now, and you're flying into an airspace like that anything should be visual, technology should solve the problem.
Well, we heard from the House speak on some of those issues and said why they want the military to be maybe exempt from that. We understand the importance of a mission that is a national security risk, right? Something that is dire in the moment. This was a training mission, right?
Flying in front of a runway, too.
Flying in front of a runway. Route 4, the helicopter route, goes along the Potomac River, and the DCA airport is along the river. So runway 33, the entrance to it goes straight off the airport. That's where the issue is at, is for a training mission, something that it's not that important, it's just for the military training. Why do you not have the locator technology on? All aircraft should have it. ADS-B out is transmitting out your location. ADS-B in technology is the technology where you can receive those alerts and be, and know, hey, there's other aircraft.
And Army's
in the airspace.
accepted fault on this already.
The Army has accepted faults because there's a lawsuit right now where the Army and the FAA have said we had a responsibility to protect everyone involved, and we failed to do that.
All right, we'll wrap with this. The families of Flight 5342 sharing a similar feeling of disappointment as you just heard there, and frustration after the failure of this ROTOR Act to pass. They say legislation brought forth after the crash was so close to the finish line.
Yeah, and those families now pushing forward as they continue to advocate for flight safety. We spoke with the family of PJ Diaz. He's a Kansan who was killed in the crash. He was traveling on Flight 5342 to visit a friend. PJ loved aviation, and his dad says his son would want them to continue to work with lawmakers to make sure families don't have to experience the pain of losing a loved one in aviation crash. How is introducing legislation and being a part of that conversation a way to honor him and honor the other victims from the flight?
I would think that is something that would be very important right now. It would put those into act.
Yes, so that there's not other fatalities, because this wasn't a question of if this was going to happen, this was when.
From your perspective, you have heard from the chairwoman, you have heard from the NTSB. Of course, you were in there when the NTSB released those final reports. Do you believe the ROTOR Act is flawed, or do you believe the ROTOR Act has in there what you guys are asking for in terms of keeping the sky safe?
I think it's a start. I think it's a start to make some changes, and they have some good things in the ROTOR Act as far as the ADS-B in, which they have asked Jennifer Homedy that it would have saved some lives.
What's the message, not only the House, but to all lawmakers, all people of the FAA, the Army who have to implement this after, the message to them going forward?
These lives mattered. Safer skies, there's warning signals that have happened for years. These are real people. These are people that we lost. These aren't just numbers.
Who else is going to do this if we don't? And just like Ruth said, and all of our family, our extended family now, the same thing. We don't want them to have died in vain.
And you all have been thrusted into this role of having to be advocates for life. It's not something you necessarily wanted. Of course, no one ever wants to be in that position where you have to do that. But it's a responsibility you all seem and have been ready to take on?
We're looking at the long haul, but we're here to do that. We're here to push for it.
PJ, looking down and knowing the work you all have been doing to ensure that not only he's remembered, but all 67 people involved and the rest of their families are remembered as well. What would he think and what would he say about the efforts that you all have put through to go through what you have the last year and what the families have the last year to ensure that something like this never happens again?
I would think he would say, keep going. Just keep going.
It mattered.
Keep pushing, keep fighting for what's right.
Yeah, fight, ultimately the goal to prevent it from happening again, which God forbid if it did, and nothing was done after this flight. So the ALERT Act, again, 2 acts here introduced in late February. What's next for that bill? We'll start there.
So we'll start in the House. The Transportation and Infrastructure Committee there could debate the bill as early as this week. Now, since it is still in the early stages, there is time for that committee to work with the Senate, the NTSB, and other agencies to ensure that if a bill does pass, it does meet those safety recommendations.
Okay, so that's the ALERT Act. So what about the ROTOR Act? Is there a path for support forward, especially with support from the NTSB like we've just heard in these victims' families?
Well, unfortunately, what we've heard so far is there's not a firm path forward as it relates to the ROTOR Act, but here are some options for what could happen with it. So the ROTOR Act could be attached to other bills as an amendment and then passed. Now, the House Transportation Committee could also debate or amend the ROTOR Act and then try passing it on the House floor again. However, with the House already introducing a bill, it seems as if the focus is already on the ALERT Act for House lawmakers. Or the House and Senate could actually conference both bills to pass legislation with both sides agreeing to the measures that are in it. But again, the House having their own bill, it's very likely that they would take up one instead of debating both.
Dylan, I know you'll follow it. Our Fact Finder team following the latest on both these bills as a push for any kind of safety legislation to come out of this crash passes. You can stream all of our Fact Finder investigations into the mid-air collision right now in the 12 News app. Just search for Remember 5342 on your streaming device.
Yep, Fact Finder will continue to tell your stories and get answers for you. If you have something we should look into, call us or email our investigators at the address and number you see there on your screen. We'll look into any of your issues for the next Fact Finder Investigates.